It's Nylander's night as the Maple Leafs use a big second period to take down the Islanders. Welcome into Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. Rob Wong, joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Scotiabank Arena, where the Maple Leafs are victorious, a bounce-back 5-2 victory over the New York Islanders. And this one, all about that second period, Dave. It was not a pretty first 20 for the Maple Leafs. Almost as bad as the one the other night against the Montreal Canadiens in the second period. Yeah. As far as 20 minutes go, the Maple Leafs outshot by a lot as far as shot attempts go in that first period, 29-16 by the Islanders, 13 of them hitting the net, one of them getting in the net, Anders Lee. But in that second period, they were able to turn things up. They get 4 goals in that second period, and William Nylander getting in on all 4 of them. But the interesting part, of course, you know, we've seen it before. Sheldon Keefe sometimes flipping Marner and Nylander, maybe, you know, after 40 minutes. But he was pretty quick with the hook. After 20 minutes, he made the switch and clearly made a big difference.
Yeah, I thought that was the right call. At that point, you just know that your two lines are just not producing or getting their mojo going. You've got to figure out something there. And so doing that combined with setting the message and talking within amongst the group like they did, was going to yield something different. Like it was, I don't want to say surprisingly bad. As you mentioned off the top, there have been some pretty bad periods every now and then from the Toronto Maple Leafs, but you know, it's a Monday night. I get it that it's the Islanders team who has not won a lot lately, but certainly there should have been some sort of commitment to defense and a forecheck, and there was none of that. There was just no flow whatsoever. And then there was very early on, I'm trying to remember exactly, I believe it was 3:40 into the opening period, where there was what should have been a tap in for the Islanders, and Samsonov comes across and just gets his pad on it. And those kind of saves are huge, especially when your period is that bad, because that could have been the difference. Like, it could have really got ugly and shifted and different. Yeah, the Islanders got a goal late, but I think Samsonov was a lot of the reason why that period was just one goal, very much within reach, just because the Leafs were not generating anything on the other end of the ice.
Yeah, they definitely were not. It felt like they were stuck in mud. The Islanders beating them to the punch in a lot of different areas, and pretty surprising because the Islanders are not necessarily a team you think of that's full of speed. They've got some speedy guys. You know, Matt Barzal definitely stands out, but for the most part, they've, you know, got some guys that are a bit plodding, and this, at least for the first period, we're definitely able to take it to the Maple Leafs. But Austin Matthews scored his 25th goal of the season in this one in the third period to put this one away for good. He was asked what the message was after the first 20 minutes.
I mean, I think just, between periods, the discussion in the locker room was good, and in the sense that we knew we needed to be better, and we knew which areas we needed to be better in, and I think we just got playing there right from the start of the second, and just got rolling line after line, and we were able to gain momentum and score some big goals.
Yeah, and it really did immediately. Didn't pay off necessarily, but that first, minute and a bit where Matthews and Marner came out to start the second, the Leafs were in the Islanders' zone pretty much the entire time. Now, that being said, I think the next minute, the Islanders were in the Maple Leafs zone for that entire stretch, but eventually the tide started to turn, and the Maple Leafs were able to capitalize on their opportunities. That's not to say that the Islanders didn't have chances in that second period. They definitely did. In fact, when you look at the numbers on natural stat trick, the Islanders and Maple Leafs each with 14 high danger chances apiece in that second period. So the Maple Leafs obviously were able to capitalize with 4 of those goals, and the Islanders were only able to get 1 on Ilya Samsonov. And in fact, had the 2-1 lead. So it wasn't as if, the Maple Leafs stormed away. They did have to fight back a couple of times here in this game. But like I mentioned off the top, William Nylander, the really, big name coming out of this one, aside from Ilya Samsonov, a 4-point night for Nylander, and all of those coming in the second period. He was asked post-game about not getting selected for the All-Star game despite having an All-Star caliber season.
All-Star game? Oh, look, we got 2 great guys that made the team, so I'm not too worried about it. Obviously, it would be fun, but they're incredible players. So I'm just happy to see them go.
Yeah, not surprising. William Nylander not too upset about getting selected for the All-Star game. That just is his personality. But again, Dave, another night where he shows the ability to take over the game at any points. And, the first period wasn't great for a lot of guys, Nylander included. But, it just shows the maturity and growth that he's not going to let 20 minutes affect him. He's just going to keep playing his game. And that spark that he found alongside John Tavares was pretty obvious in that second frame.
Yeah, and I wonder, just given how successful those lines were in periods 2 and 3, if they stick with it going forward. Sheldon's always been kind of making the switch mid-game, but then not going with it and kind of sticking back. And we've been waiting for when the permanent switch back is going to happen. I don't know if this was the test case where, hey, they've been a long time away from each other, and look how well Nylander and Tavares played in that. And it's actually the line I didn't expect would benefit the most from that switch. I really thought the Matthews-Marner line was going to go all firing. And, it did have a better game, but it wasn't as on point as the Tavares-Nylander line was. So, that's William Nylander's first 4-point game ever. He had a 5-point game when he set that new personal best earlier in the season. That's 26 goals for William Nylander now, on pace for 44 this season, which is incredible given the roles that he's played, how well he's played defensively. Probably should have been an all-star, but that's always weird because you're basing it on a weird half year. I surmise if Mitch Marner didn't have that point streak, he probably would have gone. He probably would have been the guy that voted in after Matthews. Matthews probably would have been, or the default selection, or maybe even Nylander would have been the default selection for how good a season he was having. But it's a really odd situation. And but the Leafs don't seem to be fazed by it. They're continuing to perform well on the scoreboard in the second period. It was, 5-on-5. That was an even period. It was kind of 50-50, but the Leafs just execute on their chances. And the Islanders are definitely in one. They just seem to not be able to shake the current funk that they're in.
Yeah, they now haven't scored a third period goal in their last 10 third periods, which is an absolutely insane and bonkers stat. And you just felt like after the 40 minutes where the Leafs got the lead that was probably curtains for the Islanders, and it definitely was. But, getting back to William Nylander, got the full show there in the second period. We see the goal that he gets from on a nice feed from John Tavares to get the Leafs on the board. Then he's got, the flip pass to Kelly Yarncroke on the breakaway goal there. He's got the goal that's from distance because he's got the great wrist shot. Like, he really put on a show tonight. And it just seems like every single night, he's doing something that is making a massive difference, is a game-changing type of play, and his season so far, arguably his best, of his career. I know he put up 80 points last year, and it was great, but like you said, on pace to really shatter a lot of the numbers he put up a year ago.
Yeah, and he's 1 point away, I guess, from getting 400 career points now. So that's a pretty interesting milestone. And just that shot from distance, like, he just seems to be very clutch. The one that he was, I guess, between the blue line and the hash marks there. That just kind of fooled Sorokin over his helmet. But he's just clutch. Like we've talked about, when Nylander is producing points this season, they're coming at important times, whether they're behind or they're even. He's right there, or he's giving them a go-ahead goal. He's not like this kind of like, oh, well, he scored late in the game that made it from 4-0 to 4-1. That's not happening with Nylander. He just seems to be a difference maker on both ends of the ice and is making plays happen with his scoring touch this year. So as long as that doesn't affect his defensive play, everyone with the Maple Leafs is all good about how number 88 is playing.
Yeah, strangely, it hasn't been as much of a conversation with regards to Austin Matthews like it was at the beginning of the year and prior to the season when it comes to the extension date for Matthews coming up this summer. But William Nylander will be a part of that as well, that conversation. Both guys still under contract for next year, so there's no hurry necessarily to get it done. I think people would feel a lot better if Austin Matthews does get done this summer. But when we're looking at the next William Nylander contract, if he continues to have this type of season, he's clearly going to get a nice little raise. We'll see, what the Maple Leafs have as far as their cap situation is going forward. But, what do you think that number starts with? Because he's starting to put himself in that tier of guys that are, pushing 10 mil, I think.
Yeah, that's going to be a tough one. And the other thing is, are the Leafs going to have enough room for the raises that both Nylander and Matthews are going to come in? Like, you've got to think Matthews is going to go minimum 15, probably 16, the way it all sounds right now. Like, just based on what the cap number goes to. And then, you've got William Nylander. Like, a lot of people forget that the money remaining is low in William Nylander's deal because of the signing bonuses and the structure. But he averages like a few $1,000s short of $7 million per. So the starting point is pretty high. And he's also eclipsing point production wise, the Leafs' best player on the team overall. If this was happening in a contract year, this might have been a disaster in terms of William Nylander negotiations. Because if he continues to produce on this clip and then Austin Matthews gets what he gets, well, then how do you afford both? Like, you almost kind of have to hope that the timing is such where when you agree to what you agree to, the numbers work out and the cap goes up significantly, that there's room. Plus all the other pieces that the Leafs have to figure out. We haven't even talked about Samsonov yet, but if Samsonov ends up being the solution for the Toronto Maple Leafs long term, we got a year of Matt Murray next year. I mean, I know that won't affect the extensions because the extensions will kick in after, but there's a lot of like in between stuff that the Leafs really kind of have to figure out between now.
Yeah, and we haven't even, mentioned that Michael Bunting needs a new contract after this season, so that kind of throws a wrench into
a lot of guys
some potential cap plans.
Pierre Engvall needs
down
one.
The line here.
Pierre Engvall needs one. Yep. Michael Bunting needs one. There's other guys down the line that you could probably say whatever. Justin Hall needs one. I don't know if the Leafs move on from him. And then there's RFAs like Connor Timmins. Pontus Holmberg's an RFA. He's probably going to get some form of raise for becoming this pseudo everyday player that he's become. So there's going to be a lot of moving around and figuring out what to do. I think the Leafs are just kind of hoping that between now and then, that when June 30th, 2023 hits, that all the big market teams have gone deep in the playoffs and the cap escrow or the cap debt is paid off. And so the cap goes up substantially as opposed to the just minimum 1 million that it has been going up the last couple of years.
Yeah. Weirdly, it is a good problem to have when you have a guy who's 26 years old right now and set to be a free agent in a couple of years playing like a guy that should be, pushing $10 million. That is not a bad thing, right? To have a guy overperforming his contract and potentially needing a raise. But moving over to his line mate for the final two periods, John Tavares, always seems to have a pretty strong game against the Islanders, the team that he, of course, was the captain of for many years. And that's now 4 goals and 7 points in 10 career games. And you can just tell early on, Dave. I mean, you can tell when John Tavares has that dog in him where, he's ready to take it to the other team. And, he's clearly engaged against his former team and had some chances there in the first period, wasn't able to finish, but definitely did in the second period with, that goal there. On the nice feed from William Nylander and Ilya Samsonov on the power play. Tavares says that his goalie had a great heads-up play on that power play marker.
Yeah, it was a good. I wasn't expecting it, to be honest. I was happy I got back on side because he sent it up there quickly. He's done that a couple times this year. His recognition and ability to zip it up there is great. So all facets of the game, you can tell he's into it. He's ready. He's competing and making a difference.
Yeah, and we'll get to Samsonov in a second. But with regards to Tavares, it feels like we've gotten a lot of these games this year, Dave, where he has been able to take it to that next level. It doesn't happen every single game, of course, but I think when you watch him and seeing what he does tonight, it's still pretty clear that when he's on, he can perform at such an incredibly high level.
And it's hard to believe that this week, like at the end of the homestand, provided everything goes smoothly, he'll hit 1,000 games for his career, which will be pretty special. For anyone to get that is something else, but for someone like John to be able to continue to produce in the way that he has and still show those flashes of brilliance and adapt his game the way he has, like his it's no secret that his strength right now is net play. Like whenever he's right around the net and he's buzzing, then he can make things happen either for teammates or for himself in terms of the goal scoring that he's been able to do. It's funny you mentioned that dog in him. I always think of that meme with the X-ray and the dog inside. And I was looking for that. So, he seems to be turning it on at the right time. I think he's really motivated this year after last year when a lot of the criticism was he wasn't getting enough even strength points. And so now that's certainly not an issue this year. And, just some of the stuff that he's been doing, working with the skating coaches to kind of adapt his play and to adjust and be more economical with his time on the ice is probably the best way to categorize it, where the strides are perfect and you're not wasting useless energy when you are on the ice, I think is a big part of what he's been able to do.
Yeah, there's got to be a level of preservation because he does play, a hard style of hockey when he's getting into the blue paint. And, there was a moment in tonight's game where I think Scott Mayfield had him pressed up against the post in the corner of the net. And Tavares' back is bending back and it's like, okay, that doesn't look super comfortable, but that's what he does. I mean, he gets into the dirty areas and he's a very physical type of hockey player, even though he's not someone that's out there, throwing checks. He's using his body a lot to gain position and try to get to the net. So, so far so good for John Tavares and looked really good alongside William Nylander tonight. All right, let's finally get to Ilya Samsonov, who makes the start for the third straight game. 31 saves in this one. He won the battle of the Ilyas. Ilya Sorokin, arguably the Vezina Trophy clubhouse leader at this point with the amazing season that he's had. But Ilya Samsonov on quite the run right now and showed it again tonight with 31 saves. Head coach Sheldon Keefe says that was one of Samsonov's better games of the year.
Excellent. And, there's just going through some of it with Curtis Sanford in there, and there's some things that, some things that maybe don't show up as like some of the high end saves that he's made. But, Curtis looks at this stuff a lot closer than really, any of us. And he felt it's as strong a game as he's played in terms of what he's asking him to do and the process he's looking to play with. He's looking very comfortable in the net right now.
Yeah, this isn't necessarily the best stretch of games that he's played so far this year, Dave, because he's had a lot of really good stretches. I mean, that, run at the beginning of the year when Matt Murray went down to injury, Samsonov did a great job of holding the fort. And then, when he came back, there was a strong run of play. Then there was that, bit of a blip in December. But since then, he's really turned the corner here. And, you add it all up, a .919 save percentage coming into the game tonight against the Islanders. And another strong performance. He's clearly put himself as that 1A. Does he get the start on Wednesday night against the New York Rangers?
I think you have to at this point. I think Sheldon made that very clear in the pregame availability when asked about why he was kind of going on this run here. And he said, while it was kind of a tandem situation for the first half of the season, now this is the opportunity for one or the other to kind of, get the opportunities, and when you get them, go on a run with it. And this was born out of Matt Murray allowing 4 goals on 8 shots against the Florida Panthers, right? So that happens. Your guy comes in, your other guy comes in Samsonov. He makes 11 saves, comes back, has another good performance. In Montreal, he loses in overtime, but you look at the chances Montreal had, especially early on, the saves that Samsonov was making. And then again in the game tonight, like the Cizikas tip early on, like I was mentioning, where he just has to read that play so fast. The one thing I've noticed with Samsonov is the stuff that he's working on with goalie coach Curtis Sanford, when we get to see him practice, is there's just a lot of emphasis on centering yourself, being in the butterfly, but then how quick you can get from left to right without losing the net. And it's that pivot ability that Samsonov has demonstrated that has led to a lot of these saves that you wouldn't think he would be able to make. That's why, even though when Sheldon says it doesn't reflect on save percentage or stats, like the visual play of how Samsonov has looked in these last 3 games is probably the best he's been when you look at those specific things and the mechanics and how in the zone he is. And so that's why goaltending is such a weird thing to just look at save percentage and just to look at even the advanced analytics, because they don't tell the whole story. They don't tell like the body position of where a guy is and how well he's tracking the puck. That's what makes goalie analytics such a hard nut to crack. Like it really hasn't been solved. It's not the same way that you can evaluate some of the skaters. They're working on it, but it's not quite there. And so the eye test and what you're looking for from a mechanics standpoint kind of pushes forward in the goalie standpoint. And Samsonov has looked as sharp as he's ever been so far.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think he definitely gets that start on Wednesday against the Rangers. How can you not? And even if so, the way it was probably setting up is that Matt Murray gets the start against the Senators. We know how Sheldon Keefe has treated that before. We saw it earlier this year with Samsonov facing off against the Washington Capitals a couple of times. So you've got that narrative for Murray coming up on Friday. But the way Samsonov is going right now, he is the guy. And, we talked about it before many times that every single week it has, shifted back and forth. One week you feel like Samsonov is the guy. Next week it's Matt Murray. And right now it is no doubt Samsonov with the way he has played. And, at some point, we expected it that maybe one goalie would start to separate themselves, but I don't think you can sit Matt Murray for too long. You got to get him out there, and that's probably what's going to happen on Friday.
I also think that there's work to do with Matt Murray. Like the things, just because goaltending, because I played it at a very, very low level. There's things that I've noticed, like even from a mechanic standpoint of the goals that he was giving up, where he's just getting too low, and like the blocker side, like it seems like there's a pattern developing with the types of goals that Matt Murray was giving up. That I think a lot of this is also let Matt Murray get more time away to fix that issue and figure that part out before putting him back in. Because the worst thing that they could have is Matt Murray not feeling confident going back in too early, and then you don't have an option again. Their goal is still to get Matt Murray back to that Stanley Cup caliber goaltender. That's still there. And so, yeah, they want one guy to kind of take the reins. But as you know, with this team, as you know, with goaltenders around the league, that narrative can change in an instant. So they still want to make sure Matt Murray is prepared and fix some of the issues that I think they're starting to see.
Yeah, and Samsonov definitely giving them time for him to figure that out. And as long as one of them is going, that's all you can ask for. If both of them were not playing well, then you feel pretty terrible about where your goaltending situation is at. But as long as one of the netminders is bringing it every single night, then you at least have an option. Because right now, if both of them were not playing well, as it was maybe a couple of weeks ago, then it's really a tough spot for Sheldon Keefe, because you're just not going to know what you're going to get on any given night. But right now, you feel pretty confident what you're going to get from Ilya Samsonov. Coming up on Rink Wide Toronto, we'll get to the Bodog line of the day. We'll also talk about some history that was made and some history that was not made as Mitch Marner's point streak came to an end as the Maple Leafs pick up the 5-2 win over the New York Islanders. You're listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It's time to play at bodog.net. It's Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Nearly 2.5 billion people are shopping online globally, and a lot of that shopping has been done on mobile phones. So how does your business website look and function on a mobile phone? Hey, it's Ray Ferraro. Right now, my friends at North Beach, along with their partners at Craft Growth, are offering small business owners and entrepreneurs a free website digital audit. So you can find out if your website is properly optimized for a great mobile phone shopping experience. E-commerce has never been more important. So visit craftgrowth.net and get your free digital audit. That's craftgrowth.net.
It is Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong and David Alter joining us from Scotiabank Arena. Leafs winning it 5-2 over the New York Islanders. Time to get to the Bodog line of the day. And if you had been betting on Mitch Marner to register at least 1 point at home, your streak has unfortunately come to an end, as did Marner's at 20 straight games. Not as good as the 23 straight game point streak that Marner had earlier this year that had all the fanfare and everyone asking him about it every single night. But still a pretty strong run for Marner. Actually, kind of surprising, Dave, that he didn't get a point tonight in this one, because the core four played a massive role in getting the lead and winning the game tonight. But, you mentioned it before, Marner, Matthews teamed up after that first period tonight. Maybe it's something that Sheldon Keefe decides to go back to on Wednesday, but it's just a great liberty to have, to be able to flip both of those guys. And, you ask the opposing coach to try to figure out, okay, now that Sheldon Keefe has played his trump card here, which line do I want to go after? Because, Matthews and Nylander is a very strong duo, and so is Tavares and Marner. Maybe it is Matthews that, teams decide to go after because he is the top guy. But as we saw tonight, when you've got a combination of Nylander and Tavares, it makes things pretty difficult as well for the opposing coach.
Yeah, it's funny. We're talking about that stat, and I completely forgot toward the end of the game that, oh yeah, he has this. And to me, it was kind of anticlimactic because he already has the big one, right? Like the actual point streak in both buildings, and it's at 23. That it was almost to the point where it's like, unless this thing gets to above 23, it's almost not even worth talking about, because he's what he's already accomplished from a point per game standpoint in the earlier part. But yeah, it's unfortunate in that regard that it ends, but also I don't think it's anything he's going to lose sleep over. I think when you're not executing, you're going to have one of those games, and if your other guys are scoring and putting up points, I think that's priority number one for Mitch Marner right now. And when you make that kind of switch, it changes Marner's role, because let's be real. I mean, as good as Tavares has been lately, when Tavares has had Marner can kind of be the driving force on that line. Where when he's playing with Austin Matthews, it's an overload, and they're both kind of driving forces. So, Matthews is typically the guy who drives the play, and then Marner can be that dynamic duo player there. But when you haven't gone for so long in that, and then you kind of have to jump back to it, there's a bit of an adjustment. And as long as the other line was firing, and then Austin Matthews gets that goal that very much didn't look like it was on purpose on that Justin Hall clear off the boards. So, it's just one of those things where Mitch Marner's going to get left off the score sheet that way. But, as long as he figures out his two-way play the same way he's done everything else, like he's continued to do, it's of very little concern to the Leafs right.
Yeah, for sure. And just again, it shows you the type of firepower that this team has when Mitch Marner does not pick up a point, and the Leafs can still put up 5 goals and beat a team by 3. So it's been a great run for Marner this year with these point streaks, and just shows you the consistency that he's had all season long. So you got one record that did not continue for Mitch Marner, but I don't know if I'd call this a record, but some history tonight. My colleague Lance Hornby at the Toronto Sun tweeting out that Kyle Dubas winning his 200th game as a GM tonight in the National Hockey League. Others with 200 plus as far as the Leafs go: Conn Smythe, Punch Imlach, Jim Gregory, Cliff Fletcher, and everybody's favorite John Ferguson Jr. Now, of course, you don't really ever think about regular season wins as a measure of success for GMs, because it is all about winning the Stanley Cup, but still, pretty noteworthy that Kyle Dubas won game number 200 tonight as GM. And, the talk has definitely died down a little bit, Dave. Everybody's still waiting for the first round to see what happens there. But, as far as extension talk with Kyle Dubas, do you think there will be any of that before the playoffs, or is Brendan Shanahan and ownership going to let this one play out and make a decision at the end of the season?
I think it speaks really badly if you make that decision now. Like, if you didn't do it going into the season, why on earth would you do it right now? Like, what has really changed apart from the fact that your regular season record is identical to kind of where it was at this point last year, and everything is being judged by the playoffs? So it's one thing if you would have given him a 1 or 2 year extension going into the season so that he wouldn't have the lame duck tag attached to it. But if it leaks out that he does this now, I think that actually speaks bad on Shanahan and the ownership, because like, I don't it doesn't make any sense. Like, the whole thing is to wait for the playoffs. I think we can all agree that while all of this is fun to watch, it's not meaningful right now. This is all kind of practice for the playoffs. That's really what it is. And given the fact that the Leafs really can't go up, and it's going to be very hard for them to go down, and they know who they're playing, it hasn't really accomplished anything. That's great. You mentioned the wins, and Kyle Dubas has done a good job of constructing a team, but the playoff success hasn't been there. And I think you mentioned it. JFJ's name is right in there too. Now, granted, Kyle Dubas has only been a GM since 2018, so to get 200 wins in a short period of time, including a couple of truncated seasons, that's pretty substantial. But yeah, like it would defy any sort of logic. I think Dubas supporters, like, I've seen some articles, especially from Dubas supporters, that say he deserves an extension now. It's like, why? Like, if he was going to get one, it should have been before the season. Why now? Why does it make any difference? Are they really worried that he's going to tank the deadline if he doesn't have one now? He's definitely not going to approach the deadline any different than he would otherwise. So it defies any logic one way or another to give him an extension mid-season when nothing's really changed between now and October.
I think what would be interesting to know, and I mean, there's no way of knowing unless we, get that truth serum and put it in Kyle Dubas. But, if you'd asked him right now, if they were to put that extension in front of your face, would you even consider signing it?
Depends on the number.
Does he himself? Right. I guess it depends on the number, but I mean, who knows? Maybe he wants to test free agency. He wants to, maybe try something new. Like, we don't know that for sure, one way or another. Like, you watch him tonight, and he's, very clearly happy when his team performs well, and he's still rooting for them as the GM of this team. But yeah, it's going to be, a lot of time to be able to talk about those things with regards to Kyle Dubas. It'll all work itself out one way or another. But 200 wins for Kyle Dubas as GM of the Toronto Maple Leafs. Meanwhile, prior to today's game, we saw TJ Brodie out on the ice taking part in the morning skate. And, I know, seeing the tweets that were out there put out by you and other media members, that I was a little bit surprised that maybe he was getting into the lineup this quickly. I think, Sheldon Keefe had mentioned still going to be a couple of weeks, and that ended up being the story, that TJ Brodie is not ready to suit up because he did not take part in this game. But do you think he might be ahead of the timeline here, or the Maple Leafs just going to, take it to that, week and a half, 2 weeks maybe that they talked about initially, just to make sure that he's 100%, because they don't need to rush him back right now. They're doing pretty well health-wise on the back end with the guys that they have that are in the lineup right now and playing.
Well, TJ Brodie's already behind the initial timeline. Like, the initial timeline, Sheldon Keefe revealed to us as 2 weeks. And that was more than 2 weeks ago. His last game was January 7th. So we're at 16 days, right? Like, give or take. So they're already behind in that regard. And he also said in the morning skate that he won't be available tonight and Wednesday. So that would pretty much indicate that the plan would be for Friday's game for TJ Brodie to come in. But they certainly said they want to have him back before the team's all-star break, little sabbatical I like to call reading week. So that's the plan with TJ Brodie right now. And then it's just a matter of who comes out. Probably Connor Timmins will be the odd man out there.
Yeah, that would seem to make sense with regards to Timmins coming out. We've seen different, combinations of the D pairings, of course. And Timothy Liljegren was skating alongside Morgan Rielly there for a while. When Brodie comes back, do you think that's the automatic default, that it will once again be Rielly Brodie, which we've seen for a long time? Or do you think there's a chance with the way that he's played, and he had another strong game tonight, I thought, to Timothy Liljegren, that maybe he gets to stick with Morgan Rielly for a while and they run with that?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, you're right on the underlying analytics and the way it's looked lately. Timothy Liljegren has looked really good with Morgan Rielly. But I think there is this trust element and comfort in Morgan Rielly's game when TJ Brodie is there. And the fact that they can move Liljegren back with Sandin and they like that duo as well, that it just seems to be the most common sense move that they could make outside of any other wild card decision to move someone else out. I mean, they could try Rasmus Sandin out for a game, but that would probably be counterintuitive to what he was kind of promised to come here and the opportunity and all that stuff. So I think at this point, your six are your six right now with Brody in there. You've got the Riley, Brody, Giordano, Hall, and then the Sandin, Liljegren. I know Elliot Friedman posed a question today about Mark Giordano and if there would any be sort of load management games for him down the road. But I'm talking to Mark Giordano a couple times, and what he said about that, it's not that he doesn't believe in it. It's the veteran players at the NHL level don't like taking those off because they feel like once the motor is off, it's hard to get it going again. So they're going to defer to whatever Mark Giordano wants. And I think there was proof there in terms of how well he played when he was getting an elevated role. So the six that I mentioned is probably your six right now. And then if they do acquire someone at the deadline, well, that's a whole other conversation they're going to have was who they pick up. And is that just a depth guy or someone who can replace anyone in positions 1 through 6?
Yeah, Mark Giordano, 39 years old, which is crazy because of how well he has played so far this season. But I think it's, the point that he made there that once you turn off the engine, it might be a little bit hard to get it jump started again. So you want to make sure, of course, that he's not out there playing 25 minutes a night. That's something that the Leafs can control, but, maybe sitting him for a few games here or there kind of takes him out of his rhythm and makes it a little bit more difficult on his body maybe to get started again. So it's going to be something to watch for sure. But so far, so good for Mark Giordano, who just continues to have another strong season, even as he approaches the age of 40. Wanted to take a couple minutes out here to give some shout out to some listeners who recently gave us some nice reviews online. Hopefully I'm saying these right, because for all I know, they could be just, handles or maybe their actual names, but I don't think this is an actual name. It's Jay Hansel, but he said, a great post-game pod to listen to after each game. David's got a great perspective on all things happening with the Leafs. The show stays fresh and strikes a good balance of positivity and negativity by having Rob Wong and Paul Hendrick joining David Alter. So thanks to Jay Hansel for that. And Ba Avias says, love hearing the insight and knowledge of David and the crew. So as always, make sure to like, review, and subscribe to the pod wherever that you get your podcast. So there you go. Some nice reviews, David. We strike the balance between positivity and negativity. We know you are the negative guy, as always, on this podcast, and I'm Mr. Positivity. So, and sorry.
I got to give a shout out to my friend Barry at Lucky 8 Auto, just because I switched to an electric car. And so because of that, he's not servicing my car anymore, but he's a loyal podcast listener. And so I promised in lieu of me not going to see him and get service, that I would give him a shout out at Lucky 8 Auto. So thank you for all the service over the years, and go check him out if you live in Richmond Hill.
There you go. Great plug. Great plug. Great shout out to the car dealership there. But we always enjoy the mechanic. Sorry. We always enjoy our loyal listeners and people that tune in to the pod. And as always, give us your feedback on the program, like, review, and subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods. The next Rink-Wide Toronto post-game show will be on Wednesday night. The New York Rangers coming to town. Jimmy Vesey, look out. He might be scoring another goal against the Maple Leafs. So we shall see about that. As always, you can get us on Twitter at RinkWideTOR, at DAlter, and at RobWong34. And you can always get the podcast at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rink-Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Hey, it's Ray Ferraro and Darren Drager from the Ray and Drags Hockey Podcast. Drags, we're getting into your favorite part of the year. It's insider season.
Yeah, the March 3rd trade deadline is in sight, and general managers' phones are ringing as front offices are trying to figure out what they're doing, buyers, sellers, and the storylines, Ray, and the trade rumors, they're blowing up now across the league.
Yeah, we got it all covered, Drags, along with the top hockey guests, twice weekly. here on the Ray and Drake's Hockey Podcast. Check us out everywhere you get your podcasts.